Johnson just passing it out to his right, tries to find Lewis Grabban. Lewis Grabban has the shot, he scores! What a fantastic goal! Lewis Grabban.
Hello, and welcome to the Media Man, or the Commentator's Perspective, whichever podcast you're listening on now. We're bringing you another podcast, and this time with another absolute legend and someone that I really look up to, and that being Darren Fletcher. So Darren, how are you doing? And welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I'm doing fine, thank you.
Good. And it's been an interesting 24 hours. We're both Forest fans. We'll get onto that a little bit later. But as many people that listen to this podcast know, I do like to do streams, talk about Forest, but at the same time, more so doing commentary, not just at Forest, a little bit at Notts County as well. And it's definitely something that I've been interested in terms of a career. It's something I kind of discovered a couple of years back that I wanted to do. And your name has been one that I've kind of followed for quite a while. I know that you cover some fantastic games, not just in football, but also boxing. And I know you have a keen interest in the NFL as well. So I was just wondering if you could kind of shed light on how you got into commentary, not just in football, but in sport in general.
Well, sport in general. I mean, I was always, from being able to remember, I've always been a massive football fan. The rest of my interest in sport kind of developed over time, but I had a football obsessed granddad who was a big Forest fan and a big advocate of Brian Clough. So it's pretty much been in my DNA to be a football supporter from as far back as I can remember. In terms of becoming a commentator, I was just lucky. I can't really describe it any other way. I'd not done particularly well at school, had no real interest in education, always had this kind of yearning dream, this ambition to do something for a job around sport, but no idea what that was, and certainly didn't think I could do what I'm doing now. Careers teachers back then would just tell you that you couldn't do it. So didn't get a great deal of support anywhere. And if I'm honest, I don't really think my parents ever really thought that a job in sport was going to be good for me. So they were trying to push me down different paths, which I didn't really appreciate too much, because I wanted to do my own thing. But then I was quite lucky that my stepdad was an accountant, and he acted for a guy that owned a gym in Nottingham. And the sports editor for Radio Trent, a fellow called Tony Delahunty, used to train there, and he had a PR company as well as being the sports editor of the radio station. And he needed someone to work on an event that he had, and it was an event called the Sun Life Great Race. It was a running race that ran from Glasgow at the start down to London over 3 weeks, and the runners essentially ran a half marathon a day. It was similar to the Tour de France, the way it ran, because they ran in teams. They were the best distance runners in the world. The winner wore a yellow vest, and so on and so forth. So he needed somebody basically to file copy, to fetch the results, just to be a bit of a general dog's body. And I remember they offered me 300 quid for the 3 weeks, and I was going to be part of this event. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. So I went and did it. And while I was there, I filed the copy to a radio station one day, and they accidentally put me to air. So all of a sudden, without any kind of prior warning or anything like that, I was live on this radio station talking about this event. And it actually went okay. I mean, it was probably rubbish, but it was better than it could have been. So I did the event, never thought any more of it. And Tony said, look, come in on Monday to the radio station in Nottingham. So I went in thinking I was just going to get paid and that would be it. But he offered me a job. He said, look, we've enjoyed working with you. I'm going to give you an opportunity if you want to do it. You'll do every job that nobody else wants to do. You'll work pretty much every hour of every day. But if you listen and you learn, then you might just make a career out of it, which, looking at your prospects at the minute, that's a better proposition than the one you've got right now. So he then got my parents in the next day, and he explained the situation to them. And I was lucky because I would just happen to be in the right place at the right time with that. And then he was extremely gracious and generous in giving me his wisdom and his guidance, but also opportunities to go and do different things. And then from there, I was able to kind of start to put a career together. I mean, this was way back in 1990. So I mean, it took a long time to get from where I started to where I am now. And I've just been lucky along the way that I've found some very talented people who have wanted to help, and people have always been gracious with their time to try and help me get better. So it was pure luck. There was no plan, and I think it was a 1 in a million opportunity that I was just fortunate enough to have.
And a lot of people, and that's really interesting actually, because I didn't know that story. So that makes it even more interesting, because I know a lot of people will have their kind of, I know a lot of kids now, especially in my kind of age group, like 17, 18, will know what they want to do. They've got that kind of university pathway going on there. And from my perspective, it's something that I don't really talk about too much when I'm on here, but it's like, you know, because I get often asked a lot, do you want to go to university? You've got to go to university if you want to do this, or you've got to. And it's never really been my kind of my thing to go to university, not because I'm lazy and I don't care about education, because I do put in as much as I can, but I kind of also enjoy getting experience from what I want to do, and doing, as you say, you know, the jobs that kind of people might not want to necessarily do, and kind of get as much experience in lots of different aspects of radio and commentary as I can. So what advice would you give to someone, maybe me as well, in particular, about that kind of educational route? Is it absolutely everything nowadays, or is there kind of more lenience towards people that don't necessarily go the education route?
I don't actually know what the correct answer is to that question, simply because it's such a difficult profession now to get into. And it's a different profession now to get into. For example, when I first started covering football in the Midlands, in the East Midlands, there was a lot more opportunity to commentate on it. So the local commercial radio station would do commentary, the local BBC station would do commentary, invariably hospital radio would do commentary, and there would also be a club call line doing commentary. So straight away, 4 opportunities on a local level. And then, of course, there will be the national opportunities as well. If you look at Forest now, there is only BBC Radio Nottingham who consistently do commentary on the team. So the chances are fewer. With regard to university tends to give you a ticket to enter the raffle, but it still doesn't guarantee you the job. I would always say to people, first and foremost, you need an absolute passion to do the job. And you've got to be prepared to knock on people's doors over and over and over again until they give you the opportunity. Now, I don't know whether that helps you if you are university educated and you have a degree in media studies or whatever it is, or whether you're better served having practical experience of doing the job. I know that if I was giving someone a job, the practical experience and the ability to actually do what I want them to do would outweigh a university course, because that's the pathway that I took. I didn't come in through the back door, I came in through the cellar door. So while they were at university, I was the same age as them, but I was in a newsroom and a sports room, and I was learning how the industry works. So I often think that I was given a better education in the radio station than I would have been if I'd have been at the university. So I don't think there's necessarily a right and wrong answer. But what I would say to anybody who wants to get into the business is you have to be patient, you have to be determined, you've got to be prepared to take the knockbacks and then go again. And you have to do that over and over and over to achieve the ambition, because there aren't that many jobs to start with. And people, when they do have one, tend to be very defensive of them and try and keep them. So it's not an easy profession to get in. Of course, there are other ways to do things now, which was never around when I started. I mean, you can do things on social media yourself, and you can post it, and you can do things on YouTube, and you can do the kind of things that you're doing today. I mean, what we're talking about today at the stage of your life that you're at, that wasn't available to me when I started. So straight away, you know, anybody that wants to have a look at you, Jay, and say, well, what's he like? They can see you as a broadcaster now. So in a way, I think that gives you a bit of an advantage. And if you've got the desire, as you have, to put yourself out there and learn and do the kind of things that you're doing, then I think it can only be a positive. But it just generally is a difficult industry to get into.
I was going to say, because I mean, it's obviously not often that you hear someone say they want to become a football commentator, like specifically a football commentator, because as we say, you kind of hear the names, like the kind of bigger names, and you don't realize there's a lot of other people also doing football commentary. And I do hospital radio at the moment. It's just a volunteer thing, and it's been amazing. It's been a great experience.
But you see, that's the opportunity that's a rare opportunity that you have. To be able to do that to that level is an astonishing chance, an astonishing opportunity. And it's everything you need to be able to demonstrate to a potential employer what you can actually do, because you're actually physically doing it. And whatever level you do it at, whether you commentate on the Champions League final or you commentate into your recording machine at a football match, the elements of the job are still the same. And you can either do it or you can't. And you're either passionate about what you're doing or you're not. So it doesn't change. The role doesn't change depending on the size of the match. The job that you're doing is what it is, regardless of circumstance. So I think it's brilliant that you're doing that. And I would encourage you to carry on doing that and use that vehicle to really put yourself out there, because that to me would be, if I was a prospective employer, that's what I'd want to see. I'd want to see whether you could do the job, not whether you were great at college. I want to know whether you could do the job. So, but that's only my own personal view based on the experience that I have. And also the fact that at that time, no university would have taken me anyway, because I didn't have the qualification to get in. So you either got to go down that route or you haven't. So that was it. And I also think as well, I wouldn't ever listen to anybody who says that you can't. I was told time and time again, you can't do that. That's not for you. Even in my own house, people would say to me, well, that's not a proper job. It's not a proper job. You've got to think logically about what you're going to do. Careers teacher at school said, well, you're not going to do that, are you? I mean, the school I went to, probably not, but I did. So I always say to my kids now, whatever your dream is and whatever you want to do, you go and follow it. Because if I can do what I'm doing, anybody can do what they want to do. Because I'm not a ridiculously educated individual. I'm a football supporter who holds a microphone and lives the dream every week. But don't let anybody tell you that you can't, because you can. You absolutely can. And I'm a big believer in life that we can all do it. You've just got to have the drive. And sometimes you need a bit of support, but it has to come from within. So on your journey, don't let anybody tell you that you can't, because take it from me, if I can, you can.
I like that a lot. And it's true. It's true. But a lot of people, I think, don't have that same kind of advice, and I hope that someone may be listening now, whether it's this career you want to get into, or maybe you want to become a doctor or a lawyer, or any job, in fact, that is important advice. And I do think it's important that we tell people that, but I don't think that young people, I think specifically the kind of people that are the roots of their professional career, are told that the most important point where they kind of get into, because I know a lot of young people are stressed and they're kind of thinking, oh, I've got to stress now because of this, and this, when you should be enjoying your life as well as looking forward and working hard to get to that career. So your career so far, from what I've seen, I mean, this is only from an outside looking in perspective, has been really fruitful. You've obviously watched a lot of great football, commentated on a lot of great football, and had some great moments. So can you kind of like describe that journey from starting and to now, in terms of the games you've watched and how it feels in general?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was a long process. I mean, I kind of started off in the radio station and just did a lot of things that I didn't want to do, editing pieces and writing scripts and finding it difficult to get chances to go on air. One thing I did do very early was interview Brian Clough, which stood me in good stead. The first interview I actually ever did was with him. It's before a Forest Man United match. I went on the Friday and interviewed Brian, and then they played Man United on the Saturday. And this was like my head was just all over the place, because I'd gone from standing on the Trent end to being in the office with the manager of the team. And I just didn't feel like I belonged. And to a certain extent, I still don't now. I was at the ground last night and I was in the boardroom and Sir Alex Ferguson was on the next table. And I even now I kind of sit there and I'm pinching myself, saying, "What why are you doing here?" Because it's not, that's not from where I'm from. That was always for someone else. I think the fact that I feel that way means that I appreciate the role that I have and the opportunities that I have. So I never ever take what I do for granted. But it was just a journey. You just occasionally have to try and get better and better and better. And you've got to do a lot of listening and you've got to do a lot of grafting. And then when the opportunity comes, you've just got to be ready. So I can't even remember. I couldn't tell you what the first commentary game was that I did. I can't remember, genuinely. I should do, but I can't. I used to do snippets of commentary, kind of off-air highlights for different games that we weren't commentating on. But I can't recall the first time they said, "Well, go on, off you go." But it is just a case of trying to get incrementally better as you go with each opportunity. Just be ready. But most of my formative years were spent in Nottingham. So Brian retired in '93, and then we had the great ride under Frank Clough for a few seasons, promotion, finishing third, playing in the UEFA Cup, getting to the quarterfinals of that, relegation again, and then a wonderful team that Harry Bassett managed. That was the best group of people I've ever been around as a sports team. The Forest side back then of Kevin Campbell, Steve Stone, Ian Wone, etc., Colin Cooper, Mark Crossley. I mean, I'm friends with all of these fellas now. So that was a really special time to be around the club then, because they socialised together all the time. I mean, one out, all out. Everybody was out all the time, and I was part of that because I was a similar age to them. So that was a wonderful experience. But you just got to be ready for the opportunities when they come. The big turning point for me was I went from local radio in 1998, and MUTV launched. It was the first ever daily football club channel, and the guy rang me to ask me if I wanted to go and be part of the team. So I said I did, and it did two things for me. It improved my salary, which was great because it took the pressure off, because I wasn't earning a great deal at the time. So it gave me the first time I had a good salary was then. But it also gave me experience of television, which I didn't have before. And it also took me out of my comfort zone and put me into Manchester. Well, what can you do now? So that was the year that Man United won the treble. So I was only there for 6 months. We launched the channel. We staffed everybody. We got the channel up and running. And then I came back to the East Midlands. And then I was there from kind of back end of 98 until 2004. And I went off to do the Euros in Portugal. And at that point, I was contacted because BBC Radio 5 Live had a commentary position that had come up. And these were extremely rare. And I happened to be in the right place at the right time. A fella called Andy Kay helped me a lot. And I was able to get that job. And then that was the day that I made the step from local broadcasting, regional broadcasting to national broadcasting. And that was really when that was kind of, I'd say it was daunting, actually. It was really daunting because I'd grown up listening to Alan Green, Mike Ingham, etc. Now, all of a sudden, I'm on their team. So I'm working with them. So I'm like, this is taking me a bit of time for it all to settle in. So it took me probably a good 2 years to feel comfortable working there, because I was just overawed by the people around me. And all of a sudden, instead of the summariser being one of my mates who I'd known for a long time, they were like big names, big people that I was sat there working with. So to have the confidence to be able to do my job next to them took a little bit of time. I was there until BT Sport launched, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to be part of the launch team at BT. And that, again, was my first real opportunity to do television commentary on a consistent basis. And again, I would say it probably took me a couple of years until I felt comfortable and I started really enjoying it, because it was a battle until that point to try and prove myself and learn new skills. And that's really been the journey. I now love where I am. I get the chance to commentate on the biggest club football match in the world every year in the Champions League final, cover the Premier League, which is a real thrill. I've also get the chance to do a bit of boxing and one or two other sports as well, so that's fantastic. But there is no quick way to do it, and there is no easy way to do it. You've got to hope that you get one or two breaks here and there, and when the break comes, you've got to try and be as ready as you possibly can.
And yeah, exactly. And as you say, the first interview to have done is obviously with Brian Clough, as well as a Forest fan, not just on a professional level, but on like a fan level. I mean,
Yeah.
What was going through your head? I mean, if you can remember, like at that moment, I can imagine it's a memory that probably stuck with you.
I can remember every second like it was yesterday. For a start, the guy Tony, who was my boss at the radio, just said, "Just go to Forest and get an interview." So I said, "Okay." So I drove to the City Ground and walked through the front door, and I had no idea who I was going to speak to. I had no idea. So I walked into what was the old office, which is not even there now, and a lady came and said, "Can I help you?" And I didn't realize at the time it was a lady called Carol Washington, and Carol was actually Brian's secretary. So I said to Carol, I said, "I've come from Radio Trent." She said, "Okay." And she said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Well, I've come to do an interview." So she said, "Well, who with?" So the first name that came into my head was Brian Clough. So I said, "Oh, Brian Clough." She went, "Oh, right, okay. I'll go and ask him." So all right. So I sat in this chair in the corridor, and she went through a door and down the corridor to where the offices were. She came back up and she said, "The manager said he'll speak to you." Great. So I probably then sat there on this chair for about 3 hours, and I never saw anybody else. I just sat there for like 3 hours, and nobody came. And then eventually Carol came and she said, "The manager will see you now." So I get escorted down to this room, and there's a little round table, and there was Brian Clough, Archie Gemmill, Alan Hill sat in the room. So I got the old recording machine that was called a Ewer, the reel-to-reel tape machine. Wow. So I put that down on the table, and I'd written some questions down on a piece of paper. So I'm shaking like a leaf. I'm sweating. I don't think I've ever sweat as much from that point on than I did that day. I'm sweating. I'm shaking. I'm a mess. So I go to start the interview, and he said, "Get a voice level for yourself." So I had to, 1, 2, 3, 1. Yes, it's working. So I called him Brian straight away, and he said, "Stop there." He said, "Look," he said, "when we've worked together for about 20 years, I'll consider you calling me Brian. In the meantime, it's Mr. Clough." So straight away, I've had my knuckles wrapped. So I said, "Oh, sorry, Mr. Clough." So I started to ask the first question, which I got written down on a piece of paper, and he just leant forward and he put his hand over the questions and screwed the paper up and dropped it on the floor. So I've now gone from a wreck to an even bigger wreck, because now I've got no questions either. So I'm trying to remember what I've written. I've got sweat pouring out of me. The microphone's like this in my hand because I'm shaking like a leaf. And we somehow got through this interview, which was appalling from my side. Absolutely appalling. It's the worst. I'm glad I've not got it now, because I'd disown it. I'd say, "No, that's not me. Somebody's having a wine." It was that bad. But of course, at the time, for the local radio station to get Brian Clough, it was massive, because Brian would do interviews when he wanted, not when you wanted. So they'd not spoken to Cloughie for ages. So I go back to the radio station with an interview of Brian Clough. Now, what Brian said was excellent. What I said was ridiculously bad. So what we had to do was redo the questions when I got back. So at least I sounded like I was semi-competent. But that interview then went all around the network, because everybody wanted the interview with Brian Clough prior to Manchester City. And by some massive fluke, I'd managed to get it. So that was like, and I've got to be honest with you, I've interviewed a lot of people since, and I've never, ever, ever felt like that again. Never. I've never been as nervous, never been as starstruck, never. I mean, this guy was everything in my family, in my household. I mean, my granddad would have sold me for Brian Clough. There's no doubt about that. So I'm kind of in there with him, and I've never ever felt like that again. And there's nobody on the planet who I could interview alive now who would make me feel like that. I would never be as nervous. And you say if you can remember it, I can remember every second like it was yesterday. And it's a long, long time ago now.
It's just an amazing story, because you think, well, and I think another part of it as well, because obviously he had such a way of talking to people, even just from what I've seen, on interviews, the little ones, because I wasn't around to even have been able to see him, unfortunately, with interviews. But just the way he kind of handled interviewers, that kind of, I can imagine there was kind of that need to be attentive. You need to be like, wow, I need to make sure I don't step wrong in any way.
Yeah.
Just made it that much more difficult in a way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was lucky, because I think I think he either liked you or he didn't. And I think he made his mind up quite early. And I think in a mad way, he almost took pity on me that day. And I consider myself amazingly fortunate. I'm not necessarily sure there's an adjective to describe the way I feel about it. It's the most special part of my working life was the period of time I got I was allowed the privilege to work with him. So this would be 1990. He retired in 1993 and wasn't well, but he was good to me during that period. Didn't always do an interview when I asked. A lot of the time he'd say no, but that was him. But I had some great moments with him. I remember when he got the freedom of the city, which was a massive deal for him. And again, you kind of sat at the radio station and you waited for Carol to call you to say the manager will speak to you today. So this was the day before, and I've got the news editor on my case saying, look, we've not got Clough. He's getting the freedom of the city tomorrow. What are you doing? It's my responsibility. So Carol called, the manager wants to see you today. Come down to the ground at 1 o'clock. So brilliant. So I said, I'm going today. Brilliant. So I go down to the ground at 1 o'clock, and it was a lovely sunny day. I remember it. And she said, the boss says, wait in the car park outside because it's a lovely sunny day. He wants you to enjoy the sunshine. So I said, okay. So I'm stood outside. So he walked out the front of the stadium through the doors, suited and booted. Okay. Because he's normally got the sweatshirt on and a pair of tracky bottoms and a tatty pair of trainers. And that was when he was at work. That's the way it was. To see him in a suit was rare. So a green council car drove into the car park at the ground. So they pulled up. He said, get in. So I said, oh. So I got in. I said, where are we going? He said, well, we're doing a dress rehearsal for tomorrow. He said, and you've been pestering me about speaking to me about it. So I thought you'd better come along. So I spent the day with him, the day before the freedom of the city, just me and him and people from the council going through his day. So we went to see where he was going to go and what he was going to do. And then we got to the council chamber and we're in there doing a dress rehearsal for the day. So I'm playing the part of the mayor walking in and he's at the front saying what he's going to say. And all this is going to be done tomorrow. I was there the following day, but it was little. And then when he finished, he just dropped me back at the radio station. So they're like, well, where have you been? I said, well, you've been gone hours. Yeah, because I've been doing the freedom of the city with Brian. I've got it all. It was mad. And he'd do little things like that. And then you might not speak to him for 3 months, but then he'd do something else for you that was like, would blow you away again. And those moments that I was lucky enough to enjoy are still the most special elements of my job. And always will be, I think. And because of the circumstances and who he was and what he represented in the city and in my household and all that kind of thing. And then when he'd been retired a while and he'd got his health back again, I said to Gary Birtles, I said, look, why don't we ring the boss and see if he wants to do anything? Because I've not heard from him since he retired. So Gary called Nigel and just said, look, does your dad want to do anything? So Nigel said, well, like what? So Gary said, well, we're thinking about him doing a phone-in or something, on the radio. And he said, you know what, I'd love to. He said, nobody's asked him since he retired. Nobody had asked him. One call, nobody had asked him. I mean, it's ridiculous when you think about it. So he used to come in once a month. Archie would drop him off, or Ron Fenton would drop him off, or Nigel would bring him, and he'd come and do a radio phone-in. And he'd stay around for an hour or two after, and we'd have a buffet, and he'd tell stories, and he'd catch up, and he'd reminisce. And I'm sat there like I've got the golden ticket. I'm just listening to Brian Clough reminisce about winning European Cups in this room, and there's like 3 of us in there, and it was just brilliant. And then he said he wanted to do more and more bits, so he did a couple of co-commentaries with us. So we turned up to a football ground with Brian Clough in the commentary team. I mean, that's like turning up with Fergie now. I mean, it's just like bonkers when you think about it. So just having the opportunity to work in some small way with him, and other people got to do way more with him than I did. But those moments are so special, and in a mad way, I miss him because I was so fortunate and honoured and privileged to be able to have that small window into him. That I miss him. And I wish he could be there now to see the club as it is, because he'd love Steve Cooper and he'd love the way the team play and he'd love to see the place full again and he'd love the ambition. And the difference is the biggest travesty that the club ever did, was that they didn't ostracize him. They just didn't invite him. They didn't invite him. So once he retired, he never really went back. He went back with me once to do a commentary, but he never really went back. They didn't embrace him and say, look, come and this is your seat. Whatever you want to use it, whoever you want to bring, this is yours. Because he built the place. And it's the biggest mistake like that Forest had ever made. And I'll tell you something now, the current manager would have had him there 24/7 if he could. He'd embrace it. He'd be trying to get wisdom from him. He would just want to have him around and be around him. And it's such a shame that he can't be there now to experience what we're all experiencing, with a manager that really gets it, with a huge connection to the city, Forest on the up again, because nobody would be more proud of that situation than Brian. And by the way, we didn't work together for 20 years. It wasn't quite that long, but there was a point when he did say to me, you can now stop calling me Mr. Clough. And I felt so awkward calling him Brian from that point on. But I'll tell you something he did say, and I don't want to get all dewy-eyed and all that, but you can see that it means a lot to me. We sat there in the radio station one day, and there was Gary, myself, and Brian. And he said to me, he leant forward, he put his hand on my knee, and he said, I only come and do this because you're my friends. Now, you imagine, I'm stood on the terraces like you are, and Brian Clough has just told me that I'm his friend. And telling you that story now, I've got the hair standing up on the back of my neck, thinking about that day. And that meant so much, so much. And I think it's why I care for the club like I do. I live in Nottingham now. I will never leave the city. This is where I'm from. This is where I'm always going to be. This is my city. And just having that opportunity to be around him is something that would never be replicated, and nobody would get anywhere near to giving me that kind of sense of fulfillment, I don't think.
So that moment kind of not just enhanced your professional aspect of your life, because I'm sure it did. It just made that job even more exciting. But the experience of supporting Forest just made it that much more exciting and that much more passionate and amazing.
I just think it was something that I never thought would happen. I mean, now, you know, as you do the job for longer, you get to know more people. So you see more footballers or managers or whatever it is, and it becomes a different dynamic. But he's the greatest manager that Britain's ever produced, in my opinion. Now, people in Manchester, people in Liverpool may say something different, and it's a valid argument. I get that. But for me, the epitome of a football manager is him. And to do what he did with the clubs that he did it with, 2 provincial clubs in Derby and Forest, will never be done again. I mean, it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And that gap gets wider by the year. But I think he's the greatest manager of all time. So to just get that, I don't know, get that connection. Just even now, I find. I mean, I get paid to describe things for a living, but even now, I find that all of that difficult to describe the way that I feel about it.
Well, so do you think it will ever really? I mean, as you say, you've come to terms with it and you've become more confident in the work you do. But will it ever really kind of settle in that is what you do? You know, as a job, looking back so far back into your past.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I know this is my job, and I know how to do it. But I respect the opportunity hugely. I feel very privileged to be allowed into people's living rooms on a Wednesday night, because people are quite selective who they allow through their front door. And I come in and sit with you on a Tuesday night and a Wednesday night and do the Champions League in front of the fire. And I would never, ever take that for granted. I would always respect the fact that I'm in someone's front room with them watching the football match. And I also am hugely privileged to do what I do. I don't work for a living at all. I don't work a day. I get paid for my hobby. And I wish everybody could be that lucky, because I'm lucky. So I think once you do a job that you feel that way about, it does change you. That you think, well, you can't ever moan. I can never moan. No matter what goes wrong, it's still all right. It's fine. So I don't know. I just think I think that's why I keep the enthusiasm that I have. That's why I want to do it for as long as I can. I think it helps you to be a success at what you do, because you live in the dream. So why are you not going to work harder than anybody else? Because you don't want it. I always have this thing in my mind as well, because I got told so often when I was young that I couldn't do it. I've always got this feeling in my mind that somebody's going to tell me that I can't do it anymore, that they're going to take it away from me. So in a weird way, that kind of drives you on to keep trying to get better and not to accept where you are at that point, that you've never done the best commentary, you've never presented the best program. That's all down the line. You've never got the goal that you've just commentated on absolutely right. There's always a bit more to give, and there's always a bit more to find. And I've always been like that. And I've always had it in the back of my mind that somebody's going to take it away from me at some stage, because everybody told me I couldn't do it. So I think that's always been a good driver to make sure that my attitude towards what I do is where it needs to be. I think when you start to take things for granted and get complacent, you've got a problem.
Absolutely. Well, and exactly, yeah. And a lot of people definitely, as we've mentioned earlier, younger people are becoming a bit more in tune with that, I think, because I know that there's, as I mentioned, there's sometimes people that don't get that kind of advice, but also at the same time, as we mentioned with the internet, there is so many people that you can listen to, mentors, podcasts that you can listen to of people that can give you advice and things like that, especially on things, just even the basic things in life that people struggle with, because some people haven't had those role models in life to tell them, not to necessarily direct them and tell them you have to do this, you have to do that, but just the kind of little things to kind of help someone with their life in general, bear in mind their professional career. And we mentioned Steve Cooper earlier.
Yeah.
And I would say that Steve Cooper has had a profound effect on my personal and professional life. I mean, it's definitely from being able to, so I started in November of 2021 at Forest. And I think one of my first games was Peterborough, I think. And we were quite far down there, but we were kind of just starting to have a bit about us. And we were doing better. And all of a sudden, massive run, Wembley, etc. And Steve Cooper has just been that perfect kind of manager that, for me, I'd never expected him to come to Forest. I didn't even really know who he was when we appointed him, admittedly. But how would you kind of assess how he's been at Forest, and what do you think has been like the key reasons he's been so successful?
I think the biggest reason he's been successful is because he knows how to win football matches. I saw a statistic last night that he's got the highest winning percentage of any Forest manager. That's always a good starting point. Is to win more games than you lose. I think the biggest thing for him is that he's one of the few, and we've had a lot. If you think about it, there's been a lot of managers. He's one of the few that actually gets it. He gets the city, he gets the club, he understands what it's all about, and he sees it the way that we see it. And Nottingham has its own quirks as a city, we know because we live here, and he gets it. So I remember when Gary Megson was the manager, he had all the pictures of the European Cup winning team taken off the wall. Now, that tells me one thing. Well, it tells me two things. He's either a complete idiot or he's intimidated by the past. Whichever way, that's not the right fundamental character traits to be a successful manager at Nottingham Forest. So straight away, you've got the wrong one. If I was on the board of directors, I would have kicked him out the next day. Because if you can't have a picture of a fella scoring a winning European Cup goal in your stadium because you can't handle that, you've got a problem. I also know of another manager who had the bust of Brian Clough taken out of reception and put somewhere else because he didn't want to see it every day. Now, the current manager went the opposite way. He decided to get to know John McGovern, Gary Birtles, Frank Clark, John Robertson, Colin Barrett, all the lads who are still around were invited back into the club. Come and be part of it. Tell me about what it used to be like back then. I'll connect with you. So straight away, He's not intimidated by the past. He's inspired by it. And why wouldn't you be inspired by it? I said to somebody the other day, you imagine if Erik ten Hag went into Manchester United at the start of the season and said, I want all anything associated with Alex Ferguson taken away from Old Trafford. They would literally shove him in the back of a transit van and take him back to the airport and say, there's the one-way ticket back to Amsterdam. I mean, you couldn't do it, could you? It's beyond belief. Yet we've had managers come into Nottingham and do that, which is bonkers. But Steve gets it. He's a genuine person. The person that you see is him. He doesn't change win, lose or draw. He's a very warm and welcoming man. He's a family man. He's got great principles. His family, his dad, his brother, people like that are all at every game. Family's centre to everything that he does. He cares deeply about the club. He cares deeply about the city. He's passionate about winning matches. He's a brilliant coach. And I think while it's not unique, it's extremely rare, the relationship that he has with the fan base and the fan base have with him. And I think that was a huge consideration when the results weren't quite right early in the season. The owner did the right thing by giving him the long-term contract. And it's a mutual love. You know, he cares as deeply for the fan base and the supporters as the supporters care about him. And when he gets the outpouring of support, it touches him. It gets him. And it cuts him to the core. And it makes him more determined to be a success. So Forest fans should embrace the person that they have. Ownership should embrace the person that they have. And I know they respect him hugely. And I think we should all consider ourselves very, very fortunate. I mean, we had to get it right in the end. I mean, 30 managers or whatever it is since Clough retired. We've got to get one right at some stage. Yeah, we have to get it right once. So he's the guy. And I say that flippantly because there have been managers who've come in and done a good job. But I think he's wonderful. And I think he's exactly what the club needed at the right time. And I think the one word you would use to describe his relationship with Nottingham is genuine. And I think we like genuine people in our city. And I think in the current manager, we have one.
And something struck me when he came. It wasn't that baseline kind of text or speech that you get from a new manager of it's a big city, it's got a great history, this and this. It's we've got to focus. We want to be in the Premier League. You know, he's got a vision, he's got a plan. And in my personal life, I've never seen anybody have a relationship with players quite the way that he does. I know that we're lucky with social media because we get to see inside training and we get to see, you know, him seeing Danilo on the training pitch the first time and having a hug with him and having a chat and see them all laughing together and that kind of friendly relationship, but also the professional one. You know, I know that there's been barbecues with players. I know that there's been, you know, people going around to houses and having coffees and, you know, these kind of little personable things that you just wouldn't see in a lot of managers. And as you say, it's not the only person that's ever done it, but at Forest, he's just incredibly rare to see that. And I've never seen anything like it. And even walking in on match day, when I walk through and I'm just minding my own business, you'll see him walk past and he'll ask you how you are. And I'm like, oh, how you doing? It's good to see you. And it's just, you don't get that very often, you know, and it just makes it so special. And it does make it harder to commentate on sometimes because someone will ask me a question and I'm always honest, but it's like, what do you think of Steve Cooper? Mine's focused. I love him. He's brilliant no matter what. And obviously the time of recording, we've just had the United game. And I do think that sometimes we overreact. And I say we, I mean, you know, people in the fan base can sometimes overreact. But we've had a good season. We've, you know, as bar that, you know, tough start, the contract was signed. Everything's kind of turned a corner. And United are in great form. I think in my opinion, we saw glimpses of a really promising 35 minutes in that first half. And then we had inevitable substitutions and we had to take off Morgan Gibbs-White as well, which made an impact. So I'm not heartbroken by it. We've come so far. But what do you kind of make of that United fixture and kind of the season in general? Do you think Forest can stay up?
Yeah, I said all along that Forest will stay up. They've got incrementally better with every game. It was a a unique situation that he inherited with 23 new players in the summer, and it was always going to take a period of time to find out what the best team was and get to know people individually. We often make the mistake, and we only ever look on the football pitch, and supporters get a 90-minute eye into the club for between 3 o'clock and I don't know, 10 to 5 on a Saturday. But the reality is to get to know those individuals and to find out what makes them tick and how to manage them and get to know them as people has a big bearing on team selection and what you're going to ask them to do and how they're going to react to certain crisis situations and situations like that. That just takes time. So he's never going to be able to do it quickly. He's a coach, not a miracle worker. I think last night, the reality is that Forest are 2 or 3 goals worse off than Manchester United. That's just where we are. And that's the gap that they've got to try and close over the next few transfer windows. Establish yourself in the Premier League, make the gap between yourself and the big clubs smaller, and that's just where it is. I mean, the biggest mark of respect we saw last night was Ten Hag picked his best team. So there were no players left out to rest them for what they might do at the weekend. I mean, bar Victor Lindelof, that would be the team that would start the Manchester derby 9 times out of 10. So that's his best team. It's a mark of respect to Forest as to where they are now. I agree with you. I think for 20 minutes last night, we saw some of the best attacking play that we've seen all season anywhere against damn good opposition. Morgan Gibbs-White just gets better with each game. I think Danilo looks like he's got a really bright future. And I know that people in Brazil rate him very highly. And I think, I think they're a good team. I think if you were going to grade them now, we started the season and kind of people are going, we'll finish 17th and we'll be okay. I think if you went through a grading system now, you'd put them in that bracket of teams in the middle. You'd say that we're as good as an Aston Villa, a Southampton, a Crystal Palace. The teams that are just away from that relegation issue. I think we're as good as them. I think we're better than them in some areas. I've got no doubt whatsoever that the team, barring a catastrophic injury run, which you can never legislate for, I've got no doubt that they'll stay up. And I've said that from day one, so I'm not changing my mind on it in any way, shape or form.
And it was so tough as well to say that, given, obviously how we started. But it's about having that belief. And it was a really tough start, as we saw, getting what I think it was like a point from, or 4 points from 7 or 10 games or something.
Yeah, but you've got to look deeper than that. You have to look at what you can see. People get judged on results. Anybody who watched the Mikel Arteta Arsenal documentary would have then looked at the Arsenal results entirely differently, because that the process is right behind the scenes. So that Arsenal are going to be okay. That's why he didn't get the push when they didn't qualify for the Champions League, because they knew that the way he was doing his job was exactly the way they wanted him to do it. If you look at Forest as a whole, they've got better. As they've settled in, they've got better. So all of a sudden, you could get rid of a few of the results. And by the way, you don't concede the sloppy goal at Everton and you don't blow a 2-0 lead against Bournemouth. Two things that you can't really legislate for. They're away and clear now. I mean, the reality is that they're way clear of the relegation issue and they're looking up rather than looking down. And you're starting to wonder whether they could finish strong and have a nibble at the Europa League. So they're not... One or two things have conspired against them this season. So I think everything's fine. I think if you look at it in terms of analysing how the team's improved over time, everything's heading in the right direction. It's an upward curve. And for a newly promoted team, that's what you ask for.
Really exciting times for Forest, I would say. And it's good to see Sam Surridge getting back into his confidence. Unlucky with that offside. Like I'm still torn on it, to be honest. But I'm trying not to think about it too much. You can't change it.
I'm not torn on it. I think they wrote the offside rule for the naked eye, and they're now officiating the offside rule with a line on a computer. I think the most sensible thing they can do is rewrite the offside rule so that it works for VAR, because it's written at the moment for an assistant stood with the naked eye, and there is that little bit of human error built in to the way the offside rule is written. We're trying to do a rule now that was written for the naked eye with a computer line, and it's not compatible. So they've got to re-look at that. And if they are going to keep VAR, they've got to modify the way the offside law operates so that it's conducive to be successful with electronics, as opposed to whoever the assistant is on that side of the pitch making sure that they put the flag up at the right time.
I was going to say, because it's a controversial subject, VAR, especially in cup competitions. So how do you feel about that in general? Not just looking at the Sam Surridge goal, but just in general, are you with it or?
No, I don't think they've worked out how to use it. I think it can be. I mean, I wouldn't have had it. I think goal line technology is enough. I think you can forgive a player for making a mistake. So every now and again, a referee might make a mistake, and every now and again, an assistant might make a mistake. VAR was originally brought in so Thierry Henry can't handball any more goals into the back of the net and knock somebody out of the World Cup. So that's what it came in for, and now we're refereeing the entire game with it. So if they actually used it for what we need it for, which is the absolute clunkers, Maradona's handball, Henry's handball, I'll take it. But don't referee the game with it. And by the way, if you're going to use VAR all the time, get the referee off the pitch, get the assistants off the pitch, because we don't need them. Just let a light go on when something's gone wrong, and you can tell us on the screen what's happened. Either automate or don't. I wouldn't have it. I'd go back to just goal line. I'd let the officials do their job. And by the way, if I'm Howard Webb, I would try and get better referees than we've got now. I try to train them to the point where they make fewer mistakes, and then we can all handle it. Because I think the standard of refereeing in this country has dropped. I do the Champions League on a Tuesday night and a Wednesday night, and I very rarely see an English referee or a British referee. The referees in Europe officiate the big games better than we do. Their standards have got higher, our standards have got lower. So I think the VAR is a bit of a mess. I don't like it. I wouldn't have it unless it was an absolute extreme circumstance. So I'm not a fan at all of the way they use it, the way they decide it, the time it takes. The biggest travesty is that people are buying football tickets that cost a lot of money, and they don't know half of what's going on because they've got no idea of the VAR process. They're freezing supporters out of it. Fans don't know what the hell's going on. Leads to unrest in the stadium. I think it's been poor. I don't think it's been good for football at all. And by the way, how can you bring in situations that take goals off the board? We pay money to be entertained, and the amount of goals that get wiped off is ridiculous. Every other sport in the world is trying to put more points on the board and provide more entertainment, and football just continues to kick itself in the balls time after time.
And it's I won't even mention what happened at Brentford, because that was one of the most shocking VAR moments of VAR ever.
I was there that day, but I've seen loads of them. I mean, it's every week. It's every game. It's ridiculous.
We can only hope it gets solved. But that being said, Forest have, as we say, they're looking more promising, and they're not having to use VAR for a lot of their goals. Been scoring fantastic goals and putting in some good performances. So we can only hope that those continue, and maybe everything that we've said today will bring them even more luck. Not that they'll need it, because they're working so hard and they're doing brilliantly. So, Fletcher, it's been an absolute privilege to be able to interview you. I must just say, and it's something that I've wanted to do for such a long time. So thank you for taking your time to come and speak to me. And I know you're quite busy over the next few months, so I'm wishing you all the best with that. And I'm looking forward to watching the Champions League with you describing the game.
Thank you, mate. Thanks for having me today. Good luck with everything that you're going to do. You're a talented kid. Stick at what you want to do. Make sure nobody knocks you off the track, because I'm pretty confident you'll get there in the end.
Thank you. Honestly, it means so much to me. And to anybody listening now, obviously you can check Darren Fletcher out on literally everywhere. He's everywhere. And you can listen to. Well, I mean, if you want to listen to him here, that also helps. But he is everywhere as well. So make sure you take a listen, and I really appreciate it. And if you've taken any inspiration from this, then that's even much better. So thank you very much. Take care.